Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your weekly fix of 10 minutes of ancient military history to take you away from whatever's happening in the real world, sometimes more necessary than others. You can, of course, ask me a question. That's what I do. I attempt to answer questions, and I've got a question coming up from Tad Atomic, 1943. You can, of course, back us on Patreon, one of three different levels, Legionary, Optio, and Centurion. You can get a digital copy of the magazine and even a physical copy of the magazine if you back us at the right level. Now, today's question is one of these ones where it sent me on a deep dive. And in fact, my deep dive is far longer than is possible in 10 minutes. So I wonder whether I should even just start up my own Patreon where I do the longer ones. But you can say in the comments whether you would appreciate that. And subscribe to that, who knows. So, this question from Tad Atomic is, Hi Murray, what army did Alexander Molossus have in his Italian campaigns? What was the army composition? How many men did it have? Was that the first Macedonian Phalanx to operate and fight in Italy? What was Alexander Molossus's ultimate goal in Italy? Thanks. Oh my gosh, okay, so This is, as I say, a deep dive. Let me see, how much have I written up for myself in my notes on this? As always, when you start to think about things like this, you come up with a theory. I've come up with a theory which I've called Alexander Squared. I've written 4,000 words of notes to myself about this, so I can't possibly get through those in 10 minutes. Just so you know, normally when you're talking, and I'm talking slightly faster than this at the moment, reading speed is 155 words a minute. That's newsreader speed, so everyone can understand you. And so therefore, if you're ever doing a very quick estimate of how long you've got to talk, 1,500 words is 10 minutes, 3,000 words is 20. So my 4,000 words is going to be, almost 30 minutes, which is too long. Anyway, now, so Alexander Molossus, or Alexander the First of Epirus, is who we're talking about. And he invades Italy in 334 BC. That date rings a bell, you say? Yes, indeed, because who else invades somewhere named Alexander in 334 BC? That's right, Alexander the Great invades Persia in 334 BC. Hence, Alexander Squared. Two Alexanders invading, one east, one west. One successful, one is not. But we'll get to that in a minute. So what you've got is Alexander is in power from 343 to 331 BC. And he's the younger brother of Olympias. Now, Olympias, of course, goes on to marry Philip II of Macedon and give him a son, Alexander the Great. Although when he's born, he's just Alexander. Potentially, he's going to be Alexander III. The interesting thing then becomes that when he's restored to power by Philip provides him with an army. Now, again, the interesting thing about Philip II of Macedon, when do the Phalangite reforms occur? Probably they are occurring early in his reign. There's some arguments about that it may be his older brother who's king before him, but Plutarch, Diodorus, they all give credit to Philip for the reforms into the Phalanx. So therefore, when Philip restores Alexander to power, it's after those reforms have happened. And so therefore, it's very much about he's provided with a Macedonian-style phalanx to seize power. Molossus is already famous for its cavalry. Pyrrhus of Epirus will later use Molossian cavalry. And of course, it's also famous for its dogs, the Molossian hound. Now, the interesting thing, therefore, is that when Alexander is installed, he has a Macedonian-style phalanx. Probably, therefore, it is 6 taxaes, each of around 1,500 men, and therefore the entire phalanx is about 9,000. That would be that the 6 taxaes of the phalanx are drawn from 6 different areas of Epirus, and that's probable. the cavalry is drawn from the cavalry regions of Epirus and Molossus. That's probable, and we know that from later that that's what happens. And so the interesting thing there is Alexander of Epirus trains his infantry just the same as the style of his brother-in-law. Now, the ties between those two cultures become closer and closer. Of course, Olympias marries Philip, gives a son. There's lots and lots of other ties between them. Alexander eventually marries his own niece, Cleopatra, who of course is Alexander's sister. So they're very much tied, and there's a really interesting connection between those. Of course, it is Alexander's marriage to Cleopatra that's being celebrated when Philip of Macedon is assassinated in 338. Now, that then, is it right? Is it 338? Or is it 336? Oh, come on, brain. 336, not 338 at all. Yes, October 336 is when Philip is assassinated. What then happens, of course, is that you would imagine that the plans, and we always look at them as the plans to invade Persia. Now, what I would like to throw into that mix is there possibly is a plan that Philip was going to invade Persia, but that Alexander was already slated to invade Italy. And why I say that is that when Alexander the Great invades Persia in 334, at the same time, Alexander of Epirus invades Italy. So it seems like it's a two-pronged east-west conquest of this new phalanx that's intended. Now, the interesting thing there, of course, is that Philip's death doesn't really disrupt those plans to any great degree. It's very much that they were already in place. Yes, Alexander the Great has to secure his throne between October 336 and 334. So he, goes and fights the Thracians and then razes Thebes, very much as don't mess with me, I will be very harsh to you. And that razing of Thebes, treating such a legendary city so harshly, really has the desired effect. It's very stable in Greece whilst Alexander's away. Yes, there's some rumblings and yes, there's some rebellions, but they don't go very far and they don't get a lot of support. After Alexander's death, completely different story. Now, what happens then, of course, is Alexander invades Persia in April 334, which is not a great length of time, October 336 to April 334. The death of Philip, you would think, would be far more disruptive to those plans, but they're not. So it's very much Alexander simply stepping into his father's plans. Similarly, if there was a plan for Alexander of Epirus to invade Italy, those aren't disrupted either, and they go ahead at the same time as Alexander the Great's invasion of Persia. So it's fascinating. Anyway, we've got, therefore, think of the picture, is Alexander of Epirus's phalanx is the same. So 6 taxae of 1,530 phalangites each in 6 syntagmata of 256 men, making a phalanx of 9,216 men. They're equipped with the sarissa, just like their Macedonian colleagues, and the smaller peltae shield, just like their Macedonian colleagues. Now, the interesting thing we get is we don't get any numbers for Alexander of Epirus. We do get numbers later for Pyrrhus of Epirus, and he has 4,000 cavalry, which is more than Alexander the Great takes in terms of his Macedonian cavalry. But then Molossus is renowned for its cavalry. So it's possible, therefore, that he's got even more cavalry, which he transports across to Italy to help Tarentum against the locals in Magna Graecia. So we get this idea that he invades, and it's a pretext for invasion, that he helps the Greek colony of Tarentum, especially against the tribes north of them, the Lucanians and the Bruti. Now, the idea, I think, and there's very little evidence of this, is that this was intended as an Italian conquest, just as Alexander was intending to conquer Persia. Alexander of Epirus doesn't fight the Romans. The Romans are preoccupied with the Samnites and the Latin League at this time. Technically, the Samnite War had ended in 341 BC, and the second one wouldn't start until 326, so Rome's not fighting a war. They had just fought the Latin League, 340 to 338. Now, one of the issues there, of course, is the idea of Rome becomes greater later, and Livy, of course, has his great diversion in Book 8 about what if Alexander had turned west rather than east. The fascinating thing about that is, of course, that there was an Alexander who had turned west, and he's looking at conquest up the peninsula from Tarentum northwards. And of course, later Roman authors cannot conceive of an invasion of Italy without thinking that the aim was the conquest of Rome. Rome in the 4th century isn't the dominant, oh my gosh, yes, that's where you're headed power that it becomes later. But later authors can't conceive of that not being the case. And so indeed, in the very few sources that mention it, you've got both, who is it? It is Aulus Gellius in his Attic Nights and Livy interpreting that Alexander I's invasion of Italy ultimately was aimed at the conquest of Rome, which, if it was like Alexander the Great's invasion of Persia, absolutely, it was aimed at the conquest of all of Italy, which would have included Rome. But Rome wasn't the aim. I imagine that the Samnites and several other powers in Italy in the 330s BC were far more the intention, and that was the plan. Now, of course, this all goes wrong because as soon as they invade and they land near Paestum, they create my enemy's wait. It's the context of when two dogs are fighting and a wolf turns up, the two dogs will unite and therefore fight together against the wolf. I was about to say my enemy's enemy is my friend. It's not that case at all. It's that the tribes of Italy realize that the greater threat is this invasion from Epirus. And so what you find is that the Samnites make cause with the Lucanians, and they then turn around and they fight Alexander of Epirus and basically get defeated. So you find Alexander has some success, but he basically is in the city of Pandosia and dies in battle at Pandosia in 331. So he dies early, and therefore the invasion comes to nothing, and the idea of a two-pronged conquest of Italy and Persia disappears. And so it's an interesting one in the sense that when you look at Alexander the Great's battles, if at any one of those battles he died, and he's leading his cavalry from the front, as is Alexander of Epirus, the entire invasion falls apart, as it does for Alexander of Epirus. Whereas for Alexander the Great, even though he's wounded 7 times, it doesn't fall apart. And so in many ways, the invasion of Italy is a cautionary tale of what went wrong in an Alexander-style invasion, but it isn't the invasion of Persia, it's the invasion of Italy. And it tends to get ignored. It tends to not be paid much attention to at all because it's got very little evidence. We've got a bit in Livy, a bit in Aulus Gellius, and a little bit in Strabo, but not much else elsewhere. So how did I get to 4,000 words of ranting and raving? I'm not sure. But anyway, I will try and share that in another way. But join me again for another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.